These images you see are not just ordinary traffic congestion. This is the moment when the lifeblood of an empire is blocked. This massive metal snake stretching to the horizon at the Kazakhstan-Russia border is the last lifeline feeding Vladimir Putin's war machine in Ukraine. And now that lifeline has been ruthlessly and irreversibly severed by one of Putin's most trusted allies, whom he declared an eternal friend. This crisis revealed to the world in Forbes' shocking report dated October 15, 2025, goes far beyond a simple customs dispute or bureaucratic glitch. According to the report, citing Russia's respected economic newspaper Kommersant, more than 2,500 trucks have been stranded in the Kazakh steppes since mid-September 2025, with some local sources claiming the number has at times exceeded 7,500. These trucks loaded with goods from China that are literally vital for Russia are trapped in the Kazakh steppes, facing an uncertain future. So why has Kazakhstan, for decades a loyal ally of Russia, a key member of the Eurasian Economic Union, and the backbone of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO, suddenly decided to cut off the Kremlin's lifeline to strangle it? To understand how and why this massive logistical paralysis, the sudden blockade, came about, we must look at the critical nature of the cargo carried by those trucks, waiting helplessly at the border, and the geopolitical course that the Astana administration has quietly but resolutely changed over the past few years, especially since the start of the war in Ukraine. Reports from Forbes and Russia's leading economic newspapers Kommersant and Lenta.ru date the beginning of the crisis to mid-September 2025. From this date onwards, Kazakh customs officials suddenly and dramatically tightened inspections of trucks coming from China and transiting through to Russia without any prior warning. Thousands of trucks were subjected to more detailed inspections than they had ever encountered before, under bureaucratic pretexts such as document deficiencies, non-compliance with new customs regulations, and the need for risk analysis. The transit processes were deliberately slowed down and eventually halted completely. Drivers and logistics companies were stranded at the border for weeks, their cargo at risk of spoilage, resulting in millions of dollars in damages. Reports indicate that the number of trucks piling up at times exceeded 7,500, but currently a backlog of around 2,500 has become chronic. This fluctuation reveals that the crisis is dynamic, yet persistent. However, the key point was what types of goods these new regulations and tightened controls specifically targeted. Among the cargo carried by those thousands of trucks stuck at the border were, of course, ordinary consumer goods, but the cargo that was really being blocked, the cargo that was really being targeted, was much more sensitive, much more strategic items: advanced electronic components, microchips, sensors, processors, precision measuring instruments, special alloy metals, CNC machines, civilian cameras that could be used in drone manufacturing, motors and batteries, and most importantly, those critical dual-use goods that could be used for both civilian and military purposes, which were used to circumvent Western sanctions. These were the critical technological inputs that were vital for Russia to be able to guide its modern missiles, produce its advanced tanks, operate its electronic warfare systems, and most importantly, assemble the thousands of Shahed and Lancet-type kamikaze drones it used against Ukraine. By blocking the transit of these goods, Kazakhstan was effectively cutting off the arteries that feed the brain and nervous system of Russia's war machine. Managers of logistics companies in Russia could not hide their shock and helplessness in statements they made to Kommersant. They said that this situation had never been experienced before, that Kazakh officials had built a wall, and that they were completely unprepared for this new reality that emerged overnight. A statement by Maxim Emilin, manager of one of Russia's leading logistics companies, summarizing that fateful moment to Lenta.ru, clarified the situation. This is now a new reality that must be endured. This was not a temporary hiccup. It could be a sign of a permanent break. The protests, pleas, and even veiled threats from the Russian Foreign Ministry now fell on deaf ears in Astana. Kazakhstan had made its decision and had no intention of backing down. Kazakhstan's sudden and harsh move was not just a customs crisis, but also one of the most painful manifestations of the collapse of Vladimir Putin's entire near-abroad doctrine, built over 20 years, that is, the strategy of keeping the former Soviet republics within Moscow's economic, political, and military orbit. From Astana's perspective, it is a rational, calculated survival instinct. The Kazakh leadership under President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has seen the harsh geopolitical realities change in recent years and has charted a new position, a new course accordingly. This course no longer passes through Moscow. This course is based on bypassing Moscow. The first underlying reality of this new course is this: the Kazakh leadership has realized that tying its country's economic and political future to Moscow would be suicide. Russia's war in Ukraine and the unprecedented Western sanctions that followed are dragging down not only the Russian economy, but also all the economies of the region that are tightly integrated with it through structures like the Customs Union and the Eurasian Economic Union, like a black hole. Tokayev is actively seeking new routes and new partnerships to escape this mire choir and free his country's potential from Moscow's shackles. The most concrete and strategic project in this quest is the Trans-Caspian Project, which aims to connect China to Europe via the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, completely bypassing Russia. The Trans-Caspian International Transport Corridor, or the Middle Corridor. This project is the most concrete expression of Kazakhstan's breakaway from Russia's orbit and its desire to become one of Eurasia's new geopolitical centers. Kazakhstan is geographically located at the very heart of this corridor and is signing infrastructure and modernization agreements worth billions of dollars with both Western and Chinese companies to implement this project. The Middle Corridor refers to a network of railways, highways, and sea routes stretching thousands of kilometers from China through Kazakhstan, the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey to Europe. This route offers an alternative to Russia's Trans-Siberian line or Iran's southern route for Chinese goods to reach Europe. The outbreak of the war in Ukraine and the sanctions imposed on Russia have multiplied the strategic importance of this alternative route. Neither China nor European importers now want to take the risk of transporting their goods via Russia. This is where the Middle Corridor comes to the fore with its potential to become the new main artery of Eurasian trade. Kazakhstan is taking massive steps to turn this potential into a reality. Billions of dollars are being invested to modernize the country's railway network, increase the capacity of the Aktau and Kurik ports on the Caspian Sea, and digitize customs processes. And the financing and technology for these investments now come from Beijing, Brussels, and Washington, not Moscow. For example, the $600 million mega locomotive modernization agreement signed between American industrial giant WebTech and Kazakhstan State Railways (KTZ) is designed to finance this strategic pivot and bring Kazakh railways into line with Western and Chinese standards rather than Russian ones.
These agreements are the clearest, most concrete manifestation of Astana's desire to become independent from Moscow and chart its own economic destiny. By removing its railway infrastructure from Russian standards and bringing it into line with international standards, Kazakhstan is actually achieving not just technical modernization, but also a geopolitical breakaway. This situation is a complete nightmare for Putin because the success of the Middle Corridor means not only that Russia will lose its importance as a transit country, but also that its economic and political influence over Central Asia will completely evaporate. The countries of the region are no longer dependent on Moscow's ports or railways to open up to the world. By stopping trucks at the border, Tokayev is actually sending Putin a harsh message. Our future is no longer with you. We're charting our own course. Kazakhstan's closure of its borders not only stifles the Russian war machine, it also pushes Russia completely outside the new trade map of Eurasia. This is a fatal blow, not only for today's Russia, but also for tomorrow's. The second reality feeding this trajectory is that Kazakhstan and other Central Asian leaders see Russia as a weak, unreliable, and even dangerous power that can no longer even fulfill its role as the primary provider of security and stability in the region. The most painful proof of this is Russia's own deep energy crisis. Throughout 2025, this crisis escalated, culminating in September-October 2025 with successful and systematic attacks by Ukraine on Russian oil refineries. As a result, the Kremlin was forced to abruptly ban fuel exports to Central Asian countries in order to control gasoline and diesel shortages in its own domestic market. This decision led to a serious energy crisis, panic buying, and social unrest, especially in countries such as Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan, which are completely dependent on Russian fuel. Moscow has now become a burden that cannot even meet the most basic energy needs of its allies, fails to keep its promises, and on the contrary exports the crisis it creates to its neighbors. This situation has shattered Putin's image as the unshakable big brother in the eyes of Central Asian leaders, reducing him to an unreliable and unstable partner. And the third, and perhaps most important factor reinforcing this distrust is the Ukraine factor itself. Central Asian leaders have been watching moment by moment how the Russian army has been humiliated, how it has suffered defeat, and how it has been forced to retreat in the war that has been going on for 3 years. They have realized that remaining tied to a Moscow that is weakening, internationally isolated, and struggling with its own internal problems poses a risk to their own regimes and creates the danger of exposure to secondary sanctions from the West. Therefore, now that the Russian ship is sinking, they are looking for new and safer lifeboats for themselves. Kazakhstan's closure of its borders is the most obvious, most ruthless, and most devastating step for the Kremlin in this abandoning the sinking ship strategy. Kazakhstan's bold move is not limited to economic projects like the Middle Corridor. The Astana administration is also taking decisive steps to reduce its dependence on Moscow and to reject it even in the most sensitive and strategic areas. These steps are a diplomatic slap in the face of Putin's dreams of regional hegemony and may indicate that Kazakhstan now sees Russia not as a big brother, but as an equal or perhaps even weaker partner. The most striking example of this strategic rejection occurred in Kazakhstan's project to build the country's first nuclear power plant. Nuclear energy is one of the key sectors in which Russia has traditionally maintained its technological and political influence in the former Soviet geography. The expectation was that Kazakhstan would unquestionably award this massive project to the Russian state nuclear company Rosatom. However, Astana dashed all expectations. According to a Reuters report dated August 29, 2024, the Kazakh government decided to put the issue to a national referendum rather than awarding the project directly to Rosatom. More importantly, it added Chinese CNNC, French EDF, and South Korean KHNP companies to the list of potential builders alongside Rosatom. This is not just the start of a bidding process, it is an extremely powerful diplomatic signal that Moscow's unquestionable dominance over strategic industries in the region has been rejected. It means we are no longer dependent on you. We have other options. This is not just about trucks or customs, it is an announcement that the entire balance of power in Central Asia has shifted and that Putin's imperial project has collapsed. This is not just about trucks, not just about customs. This is an announcement that the entire balance of power in Central Asia has changed, that Putin's imperial project has collapsed. If Kazakhstan can sideline Russia, even in its most strategic, most sensitive project, such as a nuclear power plant, this is proof that Moscow's entire influence in the region, all its appeal, has now evaporated. With the move by Kazakhstan, Russia is now trapped in a two-pronged, ruthless logistical nightmare. This is the worst-case scenario for an army, for a war economy. the simultaneous severing of lifelines from both the West and the East. This is a complete strategic chokehold. With the start of the war in Ukraine, the West imposed the most comprehensive sanctions in history against Russia. European Union countries, the US, Canada, Korea, Japan, and many others. The world's most advanced economies banned the sale of high-tech products, machine parts, financial services, and many other critical materials to Russia. Russia's gateways to the West, its ports on the Baltic Sea, and its rail links to Europe became largely inoperable. This was the first major blow to the Russian economy and defense industry. However, the Kremlin believed it could break through this Western blockade. It had two major trump cards. First, its massive neighbor China, which did not participate in the sanctions. Second, friendly countries such as Kazakhstan, a member of the customs union which served as a bridge between Russia and China. The plan was simple. Goods that could not be obtained directly from the West would be purchased via China and then smuggled into Russia via countries such as Kazakhstan. This parallel import and smuggling network worked for a while. The Russian VPK continued to procure vital microchips and machine tools through these channels. But now, this last lifeline has also been cut. By stopping this critical flow from China, Kazakhstan has put Russia in a complete logistical dead end. All routes from the West were already closed. Now the last smuggling route from the East, that is from China, has also been cut by Kazakhstan. This means the plug has been pulled on the Russian war machine's life support. No microchips, no machine tools, no drone parts, no special alloys. Ukraine's successes on the front lines against the Russian army, combined with Kazakhstan's ruthless diplomatic and economic move, are now bringing the Russian war machine's engine to a halt. This is not just a delay, this means the stopping of production, the inability to make new weapons. What was the Kremlin's response to this historic betrayal, this deadly logistical blow? A surprising silence, a few feeble diplomatic protests, a few veiled threats. That's all. Why is Vladimir Putin, who once responded to the slightest disobedience with disproportionate force, shaking his neighbors so helpless, so passive in the face of this open rebellion from one of his most vital allies? Behind this silence lies the deep strategic paralysis and helplessness within the Kremlin. Putin cannot respond effectively to Kazakhstan. His hands are tied. The first and fundamental reason for this helplessness is the Ukraine quagmire. The Russian army's most elite units, most modern weapons, and most experienced commanders have been melting away in Ukraine for 3 years. The Kremlin's military resources are so depleted that it has neither the additional military force nor the logistical capacity to exert military pressure on a large and strategic country like Kazakhstan and punish it. Withdrawing troops from the Ukraine front and massing them on the Kazakh border would mean the collapse of the already crumbling Ukrainian front. By starting the war in Ukraine, Putin has actually left himself defenseless on all other fronts. The second reason is the China factor. Kazakhstan is a vital neighbor and strategic partner not only for Russia, but also for China. Beijing sees Central Asia as the heart of its own Belt and Road project and considers stability in the region essential to its national interests. Any aggressive move by Moscow towards Kazakhstan would mean antagonizing not only Astana, but also Beijing directly. Completely isolated by the West due to the war in Ukraine, and having become economically dependent on China, it is impossible for Putin to risk a crisis with Beijing. China, while